morning, everybody. Today I'm coming to you from Port Smith, New Hampshire, which is right here. But over this past weekend, we saw numerous severe weather complexes of storms rip across the country. And our first map today shows you the last 3 days, so from the 28th to this morning, looking at maximum estimated hail size. Just a reminder, when you're seeing these colors here, we're talking about baseball size hail. So a lot of these storms coming out of the plains from Montana straight through parts of South Dakota, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And then the severe weather that hit parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, the big storm system that went through here with not only straight line wind damage, but also very large hail. Some of those storms easily putting down baseball size hail. We'd like to show you this storm that came right through here. Mike Klein sent me a picture from southwestern Wisconsin of what some of the hail looked like there. And again, this was a pretty common occurrence out of some of these very large storms that we saw this past weekend. Now, we stitched together the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. This map really kind of reveals the overall flow and setup of the atmosphere. Very large ridge sitting over Texas, just absolutely baking the south with incredible heat. We've had some what appears to be some monsoonal type thunderstorms that have come out of the southwest. They certainly are monsoonal in nature, but this is not yet the full-blown monsoon that we can typically get in this area. And then the flow coming across this part of the country, kind of directing these storms from a northwest to southwest trajectory. And then along the Gulf Coast down into Florida, some incredibly heavy rainfall from just kind of overall that typical summer pattern where you get the flow coming in off the Gulf of Mexico or off the Atlantic, fueling the storms. They blow up in the afternoon and can locally deliver extremely heavy rainfall. But we did have right in through here yet another event that produced a lot of straight line wind damage. And just to show you the last 72 hours through 6 a.m. this morning of total accumulated precipitation, we can see the tail end of that severe weather event. There was actually one here, one that rolled right in through here in the day, over the weekend, and then we're going to watch for actually this corridor to continue to stay very active moving forward. In fact, there were storms early this morning moving right over the top of this same area. Before I show you those, though, I would like to look at the last 3 days by looking at the precipitation when it's masked for everything greater than a half inch. So we're looking for the very heaviest rainfall for the last 3 days, because it's important to put this kind of into the context of where the month of July, kind of came from in terms of delivering heavy rainfall. So can you just stuff this map away in the back of your head for a moment? Because I'm going to show you some statistics on this in a few seconds. First of all, though, as the sun was rising here in the Midwestern part of the United States, I do want to take you back to yesterday just to show you a few important pieces to this pattern. Notice the smoke that's coming right in through this part of the upper Midwest out of parts of Manitoba. This was right at sunset. You can see the size of some of the large storms that were blowing up from Montana all the way to Missouri. We can also see just earlier in this animation, again, those storms that pop up right here along the Gulf Coast, delivering very, very heavy rainfall. But in the west, we see the position of the larger ridge. See how it's still curling around in this area. We're much drier to the north. There's still a lot of wildfire activity in the northwest, and we're going to have to just watch those wildfires progress as we go through the next month, because the overall setup will likely start to deliver much larger ridges to the western United States as a deeper trough develops over the east. And I'm going to show you why that's happening in just a few moments. But before I get away from this discussion about recent severe weather, I would like to show you the weeks, or at least the last several days of storm reports. So this is going back to the 27th. So again, Midwest, upper Midwest, parts of New England, very, just a lot of reports of straight line wind damage and some very large hail. Then we step into the day on the 28th. And this was the day we saw the storm system, multiple storm systems coming across the upper Midwest, clipping parts of Iowa, hitting northern Illinois, and then building farther to the east here into the Ohio River Valley. We watched storms along the Appalachian Mountains as well. These were followed by a sequence of storms that came out of parts of Nebraska into Kansas. And then as we step into the 29th, this is when the next complex of storms rolled farther to the south. So this is coming from southeastern Nebraska all the way through St. Louis. And then again, look here along the Appalachian Mountains, getting up to the mid-Atlantic. More severe weather reported. And then just to show you yesterday, this is again where we saw the large hail that came down out of the plains and built into a storm system that pulled right here, went across Kansas City, doing a lot of damage. Then the isolated wind reports that are down here in parts of the southeast. So what this is doing, and we'll get the official data later this week, is making, just like June, July one of our most stormiest months historically when you look at these storm reports. And we're going to do that later this week when those reports become official. But in the meantime, I wanted to bring you up to date on some of the stats here. These particular statistics go through the 30th of July, and I want to point out that right now, 2023 is only second to 2011 in terms of severe wind reports. Now, 2011 was almost off the charts, but you can see we are now outside of this thick blue line, this historical range here, and well above average in terms of severe wind reports. And in terms of hail, remember we talked about this extensively, the switchover in the hail criteria that happened in 2010. So we're looking to compare to the solid lines, not necessarily the dashed, because of the time frame. So well above the typical clustering of hail reports. And finally, on tornado reports, we can see we're well above the average, and certainly in this top half of the distribution here for tornado reports so far this year. So just wanted to see those stats as we are about to begin a new month. Now here on the 31st, as we wake up this morning, a lot of folks still watching the remnants of these storms rolling over the ridge. So you can see it right here, pulling right through Nebraska early this morning, back over the top of Kansas City for another round of severe weather. But just take a look at the storm complex that went over Kansas City last night and how it turned into what we call a mesoscale convective vortex over parts of Arkansas. It's always just amazing to see that kind of storm action here on radar. Watch it one more time with me. I could look at this stuff all day long. It's amazing to see that. But we are watching some pretty active thunderstorms early this morning. This is on blitzertongue.org. Just looking at where those storms are coming here on the Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri border, right in through here, plus larger complexes from the remnants of yesterday's storms going into parts of Arkansas and clipping northern Louisiana. All right, as we just put this into context, this is the last 30 days percent of normal precipitation. Now, this is always a day old, so this is through 7 a.m. on Sunday. And what I'm trying to identify here are these drier pockets. You can see a few of them here in parts of the Carolinas and Georgia. Notice this large area from Louisiana into this section of Texas and then western Texas as well. But north of there, this corridor has just stayed so very, very wet, and active with severe weather. And we've got a lot more rain coming through here and a lot more rain coming through here, which is going to be important because earlier in the season, remember the depth of the drought in Nebraska is still showing up in some of the crop conditions in this area, or the depth of the drought in Missouri or Kansas. And then notice parts of Iowa, Minnesota, the Red River of the North, and this extends into Canada, which I'll finish with today. These areas have really missed out on some of the heavy rainfall. Now, we need to come back and talk about these areas in a few minutes as to what could be coming through this region, because there is something that I'm watching very carefully about, 6-7 days from now, that's going to be very impactful for this region. I'll show you that in a second. But I want you to notice the West. Look in the Four Corners. Look at California. Look at the Pacific Northwest. Substantially drier than historical averages. And it's just got me thinking a lot about what this monsoon season could possibly be. So I want to show you some important research. This is research done by Michael Notaro and Azar Zareen, and this particular research builds off of some work that was done by Ed Gutzler. And what it does is it studies the North American monsoon and the antecedent Rocky Mountain snowpacks. In other words, snowpack in the winter and what it is historically correlated to with the North American monsoon, which would set up in the Southwest. Now, it's very clear in the paper that the relationship, you can't just use strictly correlations, but I wanted to show you down here and just show you this, okay? It says a deep Rocky Mountain snowpack, okay, this is the key points. A deep Rocky Mountain snowpack leads to a weakened land-ocean thermal contrast. So that the concern here was that if you just look back to last winter, we had extremely deep Rocky Mountain snowpack, extremely deep Sierra snowpack, and the concern is that is it's having a lingering impact on the strength of the southwestern monsoon. You see, in order to get the monsoon to crank, you have to have a substantial temperature difference to drive this big thermally direct circulation to roll through the area. I show you that because when you look back at the month of July, notice that even though there's been storms in this area, spread out across the climate reporting districts, we've been extremely dry. It's been dry throughout the entirety of the West during this time. But you can see the heavy rains that have been on this side of the Rocky Mountains. You can see what we've seen in parts of Michigan, which remember back in May saw almost no rainfall, and then the ongoing flooding problems that are happening here in New England. Now, there are dotted throughout the rest of the country areas that need to be discussed and looked at very carefully. But I wanted to give you these kind of broad brush strokes here of what the current situation looks like across the country in terms of recent precipitation. On the temperature side of things, I just want to put this into context. Yes, it was extremely hot, and this was damaging to the crops here in the Midwestern United States last week. But in terms of historical context, looking at the 23rd of July through the 30th of July, just understand that in this area, we're talking about a top 30, on average, in terms of historical data, a top 30 rank in terms of average temperatures, high temperatures, okay? But you do see how hot it's been in parts of the Southwest. And this has just been an ongoing issue that I think we're going to be talking about for a while as we move forward in this forecast. I also wanted to bring you up to speed on the changes we've seen now in the stress degree day map. So remember, a stress degree day is when you add up the degrees above 86 Fahrenheit every day. And based on some work done by Dr. Owen Taylor out of Iowa, so this is particular to Iowa, for the corn crop especially, when you get above 140 SDDs, that is historically related to yield loss. And what I have seen is that these numbers, now again, that research was done in Iowa, but these numbers here in western Iowa, in this part of Nebraska, or southeast Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, southern Illinois, these numbers have been coming up. Same thing for South Dakota, which means we're going to have to assess this in terms of where the significant stress has been on the crop. So I wanted to show you that map as well. Okay, where are we heading? I got to give you a northern hemisphere view of this because what we're seeing in the forecast are two large areas of blocking high pressure that are coming here into the Arctic. Now, because of that, it's going to really readjust the forecast position of the ridge that has been here in the southern plains. And what I want you to see is throughout this week, that 588 line is going to go right through here. So this will be where I just put that first arrow in a very active corridor of severe storms. Now I'm going to play it forward so you can actually see how this all is taking shape here. And we just noticed that by into Tuesday, going into Wednesday and Thursday, we just see the ridge planted here over the south, which is where the heat is going to just stay on. But you start to notice a couple of things. By the time we get into the weekend, the ridge has flattened out, so the heat stays very much to the south. This could increase the flow coming across the west for more storms, rolling through the Midwest and the plains for more storms, and then diving into a trough here. But that, just take a look. But these two big ridges, this is not a hot look for most of the United States. So we start off August with a much different temperature pattern. And then as we play into the first full week of August, this is August 7th and 8th, the models are really trying to produce these very large ridges here. And if they are there, the cold air has to come out somewhere, and these are the three places it's coming out. See that? And so this is going to set things up for drier conditions in through here, which will get into the eastern Corn Belt, get into the eastern Great Lakes in New England. It's going to produce a lot of stormy weather to roll through the midsection of the country, and the heat just stays south and backs itself up into the southwest in this particular pattern. Now that's just out 1 week. If we just take this on out there to 10 days, let's park it out there and just get a good look. That's what the current pattern's suggesting. Now, how well did we see these big high-latitude blocking events appear? Not well. We had to watch the models evolve and see how things were going to play out. But there were some clues that we were going to break this excessive heat getting forward into this month of August. So let's keep going and see what this means. Over the next 7 days, this is our latest update from the WPC. And again, look how stormy things are going to be in this section of the Rocky Mountains. But we have a weaker monsoonal flow to the south of it. Texas stays under the ridge. It's hot, it's incredibly dry, and this is continuing to cause major stress on the crops down here and throughout Texas. There's going to be a very active storm corridor in through this region. We actually see more storms kind of coming here into parts of the Appalachian Mountains out of Tennessee and Kentucky, getting into the Carolinas. You do notice there's a drier area in the forecast right in through here, but we're watching a late weak system that could come out in through this area, delivering heavy rain into this region. But this is going to be drier and cooler, which is why the models are reluctant to put precipitation into that spot. Drier along the west coast out of this pattern as well. So today's day one update. Now this will be something to watch. We need to see if we do keep a slight risk away, because if we do, we'd break that streak that started back on June the 7th. But notice there are several areas we're watching for strong to severe storms down here along kind of the East Coast and the Southeast, getting up to the Carolinas and Virginia. We're watching what could, again, follow those storms rolling right in through this area out of this morning's remnant storms coming through Nebraska. We're going to watch the Western Plains later this afternoon, plus the Southwest for more isolated severe storms. Tomorrow on the 1st, this is the outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, and this is getting into the 2nd, August 2nd. So we'll keep an eye on the upper Midwest. But just to show you something here, this is this morning's 6Z high-res NAM. We're just going to start this off, I know it's 7 o'clock. That's when we're keeping an eye on what's left of these storms, and there's that MCV. Now watch. I'm just going to play this. Do you see the trajectory of the storms over the next 3 days? They all follow that same pattern we've been talking about. See how they just roll right over the top, come right in through these same areas where they've been. There's more storms in the southeast. See the isolated storms popping up here? This is just very common this time of year. And then in the mountains, this is where we have the risk of our flash flooding the next 3 days just due to mountain thunderstorms. So that's it. This is what we've got. I'm just going to play it for you here again so you can see the setup, the trajectory of these storms. So we're going to watch this whole corridor for the most active severe weather. All right. Now, if we just look at this differently and say, what are the chances of picking up an inch? You can now see those areas again. So the isolated heavy rainfall events here, following the 588 line in through here, isolated storms throughout the southeast. This we'll talk about in a few moments, but drier in through here, drier in this part of the Canadian prairie, drier in Texas, drier in the west. In fact, if we just have a look at what those probabilities are, this is the chance of getting less than a half inch. And again, we've been doing this a lot lately. This is the chance of getting less than a tenth of an inch of rainfall. This drought, this flash drought, and incredibly hot conditions we've seen in Texas just continue as we go forward here into this month of August. Now, I'd like to show you something I haven't shown you in a while. It is the comparison between the GFS over here on the left and the European on the right. And the reason I don't show you this a lot in summer is because neither of these two models capture convection very well. That's why we typically just look at the ensembles. But what I want to do is I want to fast forward you until we get through Wednesday into Thursday. And I'm going to show you what I'm watching right here. Coming out of Wyoming late this week, this is Thursday night, there is a shortwave that could build into a legitimate low pressure system that goes over parts of the Dakotas into Minnesota. Now, the reason why I say a legitimate low pressure system is because forming deep lows like this in summer is rare. We just don't typically see that. We don't have the strong upper level dynamics to make that happen, nor do we typically have the temperature contrast. So this is showing up here late this week into the weekend as a widespread, long duration rainfall event, something that's not common in summer. Summer is more driven by thunderstorms. So I'm watching this guy right here, and it is in both models. So this will be a topic to keep an eye on all week long as we watch that storm system develop or evolve and show up over the Great Lakes by this upcoming Sunday. Okay, keep an eye on that. All right, what's going on with the drier weather in through here? Well, as I just look at all of the forecasts here for humidity and dew point temperature, what you're looking at, we see that there's moisture recovery in this area, but not so much here. So this is why that area tends to stay drier going forward. Plus, there's no trigger, nothing to get the air to rise in there. You're too deep inside of the trough. So it's pleasant and beautiful, and you're going to love the weather in through here. But the reason why it's drier for much of the next 5 to 7 days is a lack of moisture into this particular region. Okay, what about week 2? We saw this trend over the weekend. See, there's the drier risks for the monsoonal area. Even though there's storms in here, it's not the full-blown monsoon. But rolling over the top of it, pulling into that deeper trough, this is that corridor we've been discussing for a while, setting up wet. It's in all 3 models. Again, the GFS biased way too dry down here across the south. So what are the temperatures going to do? This is what I've got for you in terms of temperatures. National Digital Forecast Database, today's highs, still extremely hot in throughout the southern plains. Very hot in the southeast, hot up in Montana. But as I play this forward, this is Tuesday. Watch this, just area stay hot. This is all cooled off by storms in through here. We then go into Wednesday. Again, can you see the stormy corridor? Look at the temperatures north and south, very hot. This is just 100-degree heat all week long down here in the south and southern plains. That's Thursday's high temperatures, getting into Friday, getting into Saturday, and Sunday. Now you see the evolution of this pattern with the development of this deeper trough and the very wet conditions here. So what are the ensembles saying? You can see the temperatures here much above average, but there is some heat in the central part of the country. But watch as I play this out all the way here to day 5 through 10. Much different look, right? This is where we get the development of the broader trough over this area, complements of that huge ridge that's moving into the Arctic. And that just tends to stick around, which looks like the front half of August has got less heat risk throughout a big section of the country, suppressing most of it along the south. And this is where the heat will not take a break during that time frame. From here, I would like to show you a couple of bigger moving things. I want you to look at this right here. This is, over the next 10 days, an increase in rising motion over parts of Africa. And that always has us thinking about what that could be doing to ignite storms in that area. We see the MJO trying to make a move out here into the Pacific Ocean, but I believe it's being contaminated a bit by tropical cyclone activity in that area. So to show you how this all bakes out, this is what I've currently got this morning. In fact, let's see if we get an update here. Do we have the 8 a.m. update? I didn't think so. We have a 80% chance of development way out here in the Atlantic, and also 30% coming off of the East Coast. But what these are actually telling you is the position of the Bermuda High, which is closer to the Azores than it is to Bermuda. So if we just watch the evolution of these potential tropical systems, they stay way over here where there's much higher pressure. See the color shading in the background? So our Bermuda High is still displaced away from its typical position. So I want you to see that as we go forward. Also, nothing brewing in the Gulf of Mexico at this point in the models or from NOAA and this National Hurricane Center, So what do we see longer range? Well, they released this on Friday. The CPC, in my opinion, has been on top of this pattern. You see a lot of what I just discussed. The heat stays south. The stormy pattern stays in the central U.S. It stays in the east. A weaker southwestern monsoon. There's still storms, but it is a weaker southwestern monsoon. And that's being echoed by the newest update from the ECMWF. This is now a 30-day outlook. So what you just saw here was the August 12th through the 25th. This is now August 4th through September 4th. And what you notice is hot and very dry in Texas. Weaker southwest monsoon, but very active corridor of storms in through here. Wild card will be any tropical development that's not being picked up yet by these models. All right. From here, I'm going to give you a bit of an international update. I want to start off first. I did get up here. I was in Acadia National Park yesterday, and I wanted to feel how warm these waters were. Now, it's just a reminder that this is an anomaly map. These waters are still very, very cold, but one of the park rangers up here commented that she has never seen that many people getting in the ocean here because it's typically very cold, even though it's this point in July. But that would just tell you that it is about 10 degrees Fahrenheit above average. We've seen the Pacific meridional mode fade. El Nino continue to build. In fact, it's now back up to a degree Celsius above normal here. And this is all filled in with warm water. So whenever I see that, this just tends to lead to more western U.S. ridging in the pattern. And that tends to make storms across the midsection of the country right where I just drew that arrow. Watch this. And the reason why we're going to watch this so very carefully is any typhoon that gets up here toward Japan will stay strong, get into the flow, and roll up here into the North Pacific. And that could be a major influencer on not the August pattern so much, but maybe the late August, September, October. Now, I understand that there's been a lot of folks already trying to claim that there's going to be a really deep early frost in the midsection of the country. I'll address that later this week. We're going to look for that risk. I'll be watching for it, and I'll report that to you in the next few days here. But I just want to let you know that it is July 31st. So when we start to hear some of that, just remember some of it's speculative. We'll just keep an eye on this, okay? Last couple things. I know this is a longer video, but I had a lot I wanted to catch up with you on. Canada. If we just take a look at what's gone on in Canada for the last 30 days, there has been some incredibly dry conditions throughout the Canadian prairie. And you saw earlier in the forecast, so I said it's going to continue to stay drier in this area. Alberta, though, is different. Alberta has had some very, very large storms, and over the last 7 days, you can see how incredibly wet, and we've had some massive storms producing a lot of hail here. This is a 7-day forecast, not 7-day forecast, a 7-day map of total precipitation from their data set called Kappa. I just want to show you again that area in the Canadian prairie that has missed out entirely on another week's worth of rainfall. As we look forward, let's see if we can get this to animate for you. I've got a pretty weak cell phone connection here where I am. I'll try to get this to play, but if it doesn't play, I apologize. It's kind of a large file. But I want you to note that last week a major typhoon went right here through this part of China, causing major flooding. We talked about that. And there's another typhoon sitting right here I want to keep an eye on. And the reason is simply because we're starting to see these systems, this is the one we're going to watch potentially develop, move their way into the North Atlantic. It's not necessarily the one that's going to go here into Japan or in toward mainland China, but any system that gets out here and starts to run in this direction, that could be a major influencer of the pattern going into late August, September, October, November. So we'll keep an eye on all of that. All right, I appreciate all your extra attention. I had a lot to catch up with you over the weekend. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks.